Today, our subject of this webinar is the requirements management, traceability, and reuse. We'll start with a brief history of the requirements management tools, and then we'll also talk about versioning and traceability, and then also, of course, the reuser requirements and baselining. So let's first discuss a little bit about what is really happening in the world of requirements management and how the requirements management is evolving over time in the last few years. One of the major changes taking place in the world of requirements management is typically in the old days, the group which used to do requirements management was typically very small, 1 or 2 persons. But now we see that group is becoming much larger, which is a very good thing actually, to involve all the people from the very beginning during the requirements management. But which also means that because of the larger group, now you have got people all over the place, actually all over the globe, are getting involved in the requirements management. So what is now necessary is an anytime, anywhere access to all those requirements so that you can share with everybody. And for that, and web architecture tool becomes very much necessary, and the older client-server technology is no more a good solution for that. The second change we see that because of the involvement of more people, we see that the management of requirements using just documents is no more enough. When you are just 2 people, possibly you could share a document, send each other by email, but now it is becoming much more difficult to manage those documents full of requirements and sharing with all those different people and changing those requirements independently or parallelly by a number of people simultaneously. So it is moving from a document-centric requirements management tool to a more of a database-centric tool. But at the same time, I think the document still remains very important in requirements management. Often we get the requirements in form of a document, so we should be able to import those documents. Or often we have to generate a document in a nicely formatted way to share with the partners, to the customers, etc. So your tool should be able to do both, importing a document as well as create a document out of your database-centric tool. The number 3, what is really happening, and this is also an outcome of kind of expanding your requirements management group, is because the group is so large and maybe distributed all over the place, you need to have a process for the requirements management. Again, when it was just a 2 guy, the process was not that important. Actually, process was possibly a big overhead. But in this case, when you have a larger group, without a process, it is almost impossible to consistently review and approve each of the requirements in a proper way. And when you have a process, if you try to implement manually, what we have seen that it becomes a big challenge and often it cannot be done. So a process automation for the requirements management becomes a very important critical aspect of success. And finally, in the old days, the requirements management was the very first phase of a waterfall methodology. But now the methodology has changed. It's an iterative and agile methodology. And the requirements management is actually goes along from the very beginning to the end of the project. Even after the product is released, we still do the requirements management in terms of new requirements, new enhancements, etc. So requirements actually goes through the whole life cycle, and not only that, we should have the traceability not only between the requirements, but the requirements and other artifacts of the life cycle, like the tests, the issues, the risks, etc. And also, what is really important to do an impact analysis for the requirements when the requirements get changed, both proactively as well as reactively. As a matter of fact, in this webinar, we'll be talking much more about this kind of proactive, reactive impact analysis, etc. And as possibly you have guessed, that Kovair addresses all of these requirements, all of these needs for a requirements management tool. Now, if we go through the different kinds of requirements management tool from the early age, which is basically, let's say, 25 years, the first is the word processor and spreadsheet. By the way, this is still the most popular tool among all the requirements management tools. And we see both Microsoft Word or Excel are being used either individually or in combination by many, many companies and many, many groups. Then came the document management and shared folders. It's still the document centric. You still have the Excel and Word, but rather than sending that document by email to each other, you put it in a shared folder or in some kind of document management system. So which is a little bit better than just sharing a document or sending the different versions of the documents to each other. Then came the real requirements management tool, the document-centric desktop tools. And this is actually a very good thing because you could do a lot of traceability management, which was a nightmare to do it using just the word processor and spreadsheet, and we'll show that why it is a nightmare and why do you need really a requirements management tool for that. And document-centric desktop tool actually allowed you to do that, which was, I would say, a quantum jump. Then comes the database-centric desktop tool, which is superior to a document-centric database tool because now multiple people can actually work from different areas, and still it was a client-server based, so it could not be distributed as well, but still it was much better than a document-centric desktop tools. And finally, we have the web-based distributed tool, which allows people to access from anywhere in the world, anytime, and it has got all the advantages of the database-centric desktop tool because it has a database in the back end. Also, it has got a lot of features and functionalities like the document-centric desktop tool, like you can create the document out of it, you can import the document, and those kind of things. Now let's quickly do a poll on the usage of the requirements management tool. So let me launch the poll, and if you see the poll in front of your screen, and if you can vote it using your mouse. I'll just wait a couple of minutes here. Okay, I think it's a pretty interesting result here, and it is actually it's pretty typical, I would say. And let me share it with you. So I'm closing the poll, so if you have not done it, please do it right now. Okay, I'm closing the poll. And let me share the results. So the result shows 62% is word processor and spreadsheet, which is kind of expected, as I said, that it is the most popular tool. Then you have got 15% who are using the document management and shared folders. 0 document-centric desktop tools. 8% is a database-centric desktop tools, and about 15% are web-based distributed tools. So which is, I think, is a very typical result. Okay, so we are talking about the versioning, and the biggest challenge in the requirements management is how do you manage the change. So whenever you have the changes in the requirements, the first question is how do you track those changes? How do you compare the changes? That means that what was the previous one and what are the changes we have made? And what is really important and often missed is that knowing the context of the changes. Why did we make that change? So all of these are actually addressed by versioning. So when you do the versioning, every time you make any kind of substantial change, you create a new version. You don't make the version every time you make a change. For example, if there is a typo, you don't want to make a new version for that. It's not really necessary. But when you make a substantial change or a change in the core requirement, in that case, you need to create a new version. For example, the color was red and now it is blue, so you should create a new version for that. And then this versioning should allow you to do a comparison between the versions so you know that what has been changed, what has been added, what has been deleted, what has been changed in terms of the text. And then also you need to capture the context that why you have made the change by some multi-threaded discussions, right? So these are the basic requirements for any tool which is managing the changes in requirements. Now let me show you how Kovair actually does versioning. So let me go to the Kovair, this is our Kovair application, and we are looking at one particular requirement, requirement ID 1, and let me just scroll it down here. And in the version, we have got a number of versions here, so let me just expand the version number 5 here, and it shows the version for that with the description. As a matter of fact, Kovair allows you to do a very rich kind of text as a part of the description. And then as you go down, you see that it has also got multi-threaded discussion with that. That is the context. That gives you the idea that why did you make a change. So 6 months later, somebody asked that, Sky, why did we change from red to blue? So you can always come back here and see all the discussion which has taken place and why you have made those changes. In Kovair, the version not only includes the changes in the description, but it can also be the changes in some of the included field values. So those are also included in the version. So that is one way to look at the version. Now, also in Kovair, we can do a comparison between the versions. So for example, here are the versions, and if I want to know what has been changed between the version 1 and version 3, it is not necessary that you have to see only 2 consecutive versions. And then if we go to the compare, that will show us the differences between the version 1 and version 3 in a color-coded way. And this color coding has, for example, change text, inserted text, remove text, etc. So using this color coding, we know that what are the differences between these 2 versions. Okay? So that is how we do the versioning here. So let me go back to the presentation once again. All right. Now let me introduce the whole subject of traceability. Traceability is one of the, I think, the most critical aspect of requirements management. Many a time, people actually go into requirements management in a more structured, much more formal way because of the need for traceability analysis. Whether the need actually is driven by some internal events, or it is asked by external agencies, whether it's a government, whether it's a particular contract, whatever may be the reason, but often the traceability is the main reason people go for a more formal requirements management. So one of the challenges, and possibly the most important challenge of the change management, is that when you are changing the requirement, what is the cause of that change? And also, what is the impact of changes? I'm sure that many of you have faced this kind of problem, that your customer has asked for a change in the requirement, and immediately the question arose that if I make that changes, how it will impact rest of the system, how many other requirements will be impacted, how this will impact my schedule of delivery, how this will change, or how it will impact whole my QA and testing schedule. So all of those things can be answered when we talk about the traceability and create the traceability as a solution to these questions. So what is basically the traceability? One way to look at the traceability is to describe and follow the life of a requirement in forward and backward direction. So at any point for any requirement, if you look at how we reached at that requirement from the past and how we are going forward from this requirement, that actually defines the traceability. If we can define that path both towards the past and towards the future, that will be a part of that traceability. And also traceability from its origin through its development and specification to its subsequent deployment and use. So if you think about the very first requirement or the inception of the requirement to the design, to coding, to testing, to build, to the deployment, all of these different phases are all related to the same requirement as it goes through that life cycle. And the traceability actually traces that whole life cycle of the requirement with all the related artifacts. And finally, through all periods of ongoing refinement and iteration in any of these phases. And as the things are changing, including the requirement itself, or the test case, or the design, the traceability should be able to track those changes as well. And that is a kind of overview of the definition of traceability. Now, the traceability can be both vertical and horizontal. So let me give you an example. The vertical traceability is when the traceability relation is between the requirements of different types and levels. So what happens that when we start with a very high-level kind of requirements, a very cryptic one-liner. And sometimes people call it a customer requirement or a business requirement or a marketing requirement. And then from that we generate, for example, the functional requirements, which explains that to fulfill that particular customer requirement, what are the functional requirements or non-functional requirements we have to implement. And then from functional requirements, we can go into, if it is a hardware software-based system, we can go to the hardware system requirement and software system requirement, which is in much more detail, talks about the implementation, etc. So you have got these different levels of requirement in terms of how detailed you have the specifications. The vertical traceability traces or makes the relations between the requirements of these different levels and different types of requirements. So you can have a customer requirement which is related to a number of functional requirements, and then each of these functional requirements can be related to a number of software and hardware system requirements, etc. So that is a vertical traceability. Then you have the horizontal traceability, which is between the requirements of the same type. So when you have, for example, the functional requirements which can be related to each other because they are dependent on each other, in that case you have a horizontal traceability between two functional requirements. Similarly, you can have a horizontal traceability between two system requirements, between two hardware system requirements, between two software system requirements, etc. So pictorial, this is one example of such vertical and horizontal traceability. As you can see, at a very high level, we have a customer marketing high-level requirement called media login page, a very simple one-liner. But then you go to the functional requirements and non-functional requirements where you can detail out. The functional requirement says should have a way to enter user ID and password, and possibly you can detail it out that it should look like this on the screen, etc. And you can also have a non-functional requirement, which is typically, let's say, a performance requirement, which says that it should not take more than 2 seconds. Then to implement the functional requirements, now we have the system requirements. For example, it says that should support LDAP integration for a single sign-on. There may be a system requirement which says that what kind of encryption should be used. So all these vertical arrows between the different levels of requirements are the vertical traceability. On the other hand, between the two system requirements, the horizontal arrow shows the horizontal traceability, where the LDAP integration, the requirement for LDAP integration and requirement for the encryption, they are related to each other, so that you know that that particular encryption technology is used for LDAP or not. Now, what are the different kinds of traceability features we should be using? First of all, traceability is just a generic name for various kinds of relations. Traceability that's actually a very important point, because many of the requirements management tools, typically they just allow you to create just one kind of relation, and that is called the traceability. But between the requirements, there can be multiple different kinds of relationship. And these are some of the examples. So first of all, one is called the fulfillment. And that is typically a vertical relationship between different levels of requirements. So you have a high-level requirement, and then you have the functional requirements. So that high-level requirement can be fulfilled by implementing the functional requirements. The functional requirement can be fulfilled by implementing system requirements. So fulfillment can be one kind of relation. Containment can be another kind of relation. So containment basically means that our requirement, which is kind of a container for multiple other requirements. And this is a typical way to define feature, for example. A feature is really a container of a number of different kinds of requirements, and typically that is also a high-level requirement. Successor predecessor. I need to implement the requirement number 5 before requirement number 3, and that is a successor-predecessor relationship. So that is also, you should be able to define that between the requirements. And finally, the duplicate of the requirements. And this is actually a very interesting one, because what happens is that because we gather requirements from a number of different sources, we often get the requirements which are really duplicate. We already have that requirement in the system. So rather than just closing it or deleting it, you should be able to actually relate it to the one we are tracking right now, so that you at least know that this particular requirement has been requested by a number of other sources as well. So there should be a relationship like the duplicate requirements in the system. Now, when you have multiple relationships, there should be a possibility that you should be able to define multiple relations between the same pair of requirements. So the same two pair can have a fulfillment relationship, or and the containment relationship may not have the successor-predecessor relationship, but the fulfillment and containment can be simultaneously between the same pair of requirements. And then comes the traceability with other artifacts. As I have mentioned, that if you think about the traceability in a larger, in a bigger picture, it is not just between the requirements. The requirements, as it goes through its life cycle, it touches so many other artifacts, the design elements, the test cases, the risk, the issues, etc. So it is very important to keep those relationships, keep the traceability between the requirements and all of those artifacts which are related to that particular requirement. So the traceability allows you to do that. Now, one of the biggest challenge is that many of these other artifacts are actually not managed by the requirements management tool. Then how do you create that kind of traceability? The answer to that is that, first of all, your requirements management tool should be able to integrate with the other third-party tools so that you can actually create the traceability with those things. And of course, not only integration, you should be able to also do the traceability across the boundary of the tool. Or you can also use a tool like Kovair, because Kovair itself can manage all of those artifacts in a single tool. So in that case, you don't have to get other third-party tools for managing the design elements, the test cases, risks, issues, etc. And finally, orphan analysis. That is another very important thing for the traceability. So the orphan analysis basically means, orphan means that who doesn't have any relation. Now, orphan analysis allows you to do that what are those requirements which does not have a relation. So for example, you have received a set of customer requirement. Now, with the orphan analysis, you know that a set of customer requirement doesn't have any kind of functional requirements related to that, which means that they will never be implemented. So unless you have the orphan analysis, you never know that whether your coverage for implementing all the requirements are complete or not. So the orphan analysis actually allows you to do. Another example of orphan analysis is the relation between the requirements and test cases. If you have a need to actually, by contract, that all the functional requirements has to be tested, and there must be at least one test case to show that that requirement has been tested and passed. then using the ORFA analysis, you know that whether that particular need, that particular requirement is addressed or not. When you have the traceability relation, I think the next question is that, so what? How do I use the traceability relation? So far we have talked about what is traceability relation and what are the features of the traceability relation. Now we are talking about that how do we use traceability relation. As I have mentioned that one of the biggest challenge traceability is actually solving or addressing is the impact of changes. So there are two kinds of impact analysis. One is a proactive impact analysis, another is a reactive impact analysis. The proactive impact analysis actually allows you to see before you make a change that what will be the impact of that change. And that is done by influence count. Influence count is basically how many other items are being influenced by this particular requirement. And that will give you a very good indication that if I change this particular requirement, how many other items will be changed. And the sensitivity count actually says that this particular item, how many other items are influencing this item. So this is just the reverse of the influence count. Now, if you add the influence count and sensitivity count, that gives you a very good idea that how connected this particular requirement is with respect to the rest of the system. Now, that was the proactive impact analysis, which you can know that before making the changes, what are the other items will be impacted. And then you can decide whether it makes sense to do that change or not. The reactive impact analysis is when the change has been already done. So when a change is done, our requirements management tool should flag all the suspect or impacted items, saying that because of the change in this particular item, all these other items are now suspect or impacted. Basically, which means that you should go to those items and check it out and see that because of the change of the original item, the root cause, that is the requirement which has been changed, whether I need to change each one of them. A very good example is the relation between the requirements and the test case. So the requirement was color red, and now it is color blue. Now, the test case, the original test case is testing against the color red. But if they don't know the requirement is now changed to blue, they will be still testing it again red and creating false error. So when you have a relation between the test case and the requirement changes, and the test case becomes a suspect or impacted, now the tester or the QA manager can go to that particular test case and see, oh, it is actually now changed from red to blue, so I need to change the test case also from red to blue. So that is how you can take care of that situations where things fall through the crack and create a lot of other kinds of problems which should not be there if you do your traceability and impact analysis in a proper way. And one more thing is about the propagation of impact. The impact is typically, and almost always, is the next level. So all the other requirements which is related to this particular requirement gets impacted. Now what about the other items which are related to each of these child requirements at the same next level? And you can actually propagate that to a number of different levels. So a requirements management tool should allow you to actually propagate that impact beyond the next level. So the level 1 was changed, level 2 was impacted, now you should be able to propagate it to level 3, level 4 if necessary. And you should be able to do it in a selective manner because you don't need to propagate each and every one. If you want to do it, you can just propagate it. So that is how you do the impact analysis. Now here is the example of some of the traceability, the way people do traceability using documents. So typically you have the Word document full of requirements with some IDs. Let's say the customer requirement starts with CR, function requirement starts with FR, etc. And then you use some kind of either document like the Word or Excel spreadsheet to show the traceability relation, right? So this one works pretty well so long nothing is changing. But let's say you have created a new requirement and because of that the ID has been changed, okay? In that case, it becomes very difficult to manage these requirements or these traceability relations, because you have to change almost everything manually here. And as I have said, in most of the cases, people go to a requirements management tool when they try to do the traceability management using documents, and they fail to do that. So now let's go and let me show you how Kovair does traceability. Okay. First of all, let's talk about how the traceability views are created. You can have the whole hierarchy of the traceability starting from a project, for example. Under the project, you can have a number of different requirements. So these are all the requirements which belongs to a particular project. Now I can expand a particular requirement, and that shows the traceability relation with that particular requirement. So here are some of the requirements which are related to this particular requirement. And then also we have got some test cases which are related to the same requirement. Now, if we expand the test case, that shows me another level, which is the test case to issues. So in a single tool, you can see from directly starting from the project to the requirements, and that the requirements are related to the other requirements by traceability relation, requirements to the test cases, and test cases to the issues. So we're basically looking at 4 different levels of traceability relation across a number of different entities. So we have seen both the relations between the requirements as well as relations and requirements and other entities. So that is one way to look at the traceability. Another way to look at the traceability is by traceability metrics. So this is a traceability matrix. The relation is between requirements to requirements, and also it says that all highlight orphans. That means those orphans which doesn't have any relation, those are already highlighted. So as you can see, this 59, 63, these requirements, and here on the left-hand side also, actually we don't have any orphan on the left-hand side. The rows are all customer requirements, and the columns are all the functional requirements. So you can actually create, using a particular filter, you can show only those types of requirements in rows and on columns. So it shows that all customer requirement and all functional requirements here. Now, if you look at each of the cell, each cell having a row and a column, if there is a relationship, it shows. And since this is bidirectional, that's why it shows that these are bidirectional, arrow having two directions. And those with a bolt, which basically means that this has been actually impacted because one of them have been changed. I can even create a relationship directly here if I double-click a particular cell, and that creates that particular relationship. So it is not just a read-only view, but you can actually use this view to create relationship as well. And I can also delete from here. So you can manage those relationships directly from this matrix as well. There is another way of looking at the relationship is by what we call the relationship diagram. So this is the, let me make it a little bigger here. So here is the relationship diagram between the requirements number 1 and all the other items, including the requirements. RE means requirements, D means design element, and T means test cases, which are all related to this particular requirement. And if I double-click one item, that actually expands, and it will show me all the other requirements which are related to that particular requirement. And this is how I can expand at every level and see how this relationship, the network of the relationship, kind of expands to the next level, etc. So those are the different kinds of ways we can see and manage the traceability relation. As a matter of fact, for each one of them, not only you can view them, but you can also create and edit and delete the relationship directly from that view. The next thing I'd like to show you is the impact analysis. So this is a section for the requirement number 1, the same requirement number 1 which we have seen the versions for. And here is the section which shows that it has been actually impacted by a number of other requirements. So for example, if I go to the detail of one of those, it shows that it has been impacted by requirement number 6, and it also shows that reason for that impact, the version has been actually changed, and then we have also a way to propagate that particular impact to the next level. And as I said, that you can select one or more such propagation level, and then it will kind of propagate to the next level. So Kovair actually allows you to do all of those things. Okay, so I think those are all the different things we wanted to show you as far as the Kovair's ability to manage traceability. Actually, Kovair has a very powerful way of doing traceability, and the one I have just shown you are only the kind of views of looking at those traceabilities, but there are other additional kind of reporting and other things are also available. So let's go back to our presentation here. Okay, so quickly let's take a poll on the usage of the traceability here. All right, so let me do the poll quickly here. It's a very simple one, yes and no. Please use your mouse. Okay, we see that still there are a few people who has not answered. All right, I'll just close the poll, and it's still a very interesting result, I must say. Let me share the result. So it shows that 46% is yes and 54% is no after 76% have been voted. Okay, so which shows that it's almost kind of close that way, but which basically shows that 50% of the people, or more than 50% of the people, are not actually using traceability. And not using the traceability, as we have seen, means that they are missing a lot of the power of requirements management, and many of the change managements they are not doing. So let me hide the result so that we can go back to the presentation. Okay. Now let's talk about the reusing of the requirements. First of all, the question is that why do you need to reuse? That you need to reuse when you have the new products. For example, Apple is coming up with an iPhone the first time. And iPhone, if you know, I'm sorry, they are coming up with a new product called the iPod Touch, which is very similar to iPhone. Only thing is that it doesn't do any kind of phoning. But the rest of the thing, for example, the whole multimedia thing is basically the same with iPhone. It's a new product, but a lot of features are coming from another product called iPhone. Or we are talking about the new release. So Apple is coming up with a new iPhone release, and where maybe 80% or 90% of the features are exactly the same, you have got some new features. Or you have a new customer, so you need certain additional requirements, but those requirements are very similar to the old one with a little bit of changes, right? So those are the reasons for reuse. And how do you do the reuse? There are two ways we can do it. One is cloning. That means I have a requirement, I just make a copy of that, and then I can change it, and it can have its own life cycle to move forward. And the second reuse technique is called the branching. Branching means it is the same requirement, but we create a new version of that requirement with a new branch for this special case. Now let me kind of explain the difference and how it kind of, where you use the cloning and branching. I think that is always a big question. I'll explain that in a minute. But when you are doing both cloning and branching, you should be able to preserve the traceability if necessary, or clone the related requirements if necessary. So let me make an example. So I am cloning requirement number 5. Now I should have an option to create the clone, which is requirement number 20 or 200 or whatever, automatically related to all those other requirements and all those other items which are already related to requirement number 5. Okay? Or in some cases, I may want to clone also all the related items in one single action. Because I spent so much of time and effort to create those traceability relationships, I don't want to go through that again. Either I should be able to reuse the traceability relation, or using the traceability relation, I should be able to clone all those related items and make the relation at the same time in a single action. So here's an example of the cloning and branching. In the first case, when it is cloning, I have a requirement number 23 for the login page, and then I cloned it for two customers, customer 1 and customer 2. One is a requirement number 176, another is requirement number 213. Both start with its own version 1. Okay? And then the branching is, the requirement number remains the same, 23, but now we add a branch label for customer 1 and customer 2. And for each one of them, actual requirements are changed also. But remember, the requirement number remains the same, 23. Okay? Now the question is, when do you do cloning and when do you do branching? Cloning you do when the changes in the requirements are, though it is similar, but the changes are substantial. In that case, you make a new requirement having its own requirement number so that you don't have any confusion with the previous requirement. Branching you do when the changes are very subtle and very small. You still really referring to the same requirement but with a subtle change. Now in this example, as a matter of fact, and this is a real example, that one of our customers asked for certain custom text on the login page. And that is really a login page, the same requirement as the original one with a little bit of custom text. So that's why I think this is a better example for branching rather than cloning. But on the other hand, there are many instances we had to clone because the new requirement, though it is very similar to the previous one, but it has got a substantially more changes. Let me show you how we do in Kovair cloning and branching. So first of all, let's look at the cloning. So here are an action for cloning. And as you can see here, the clone options, we can clone this item only and establish the traceability with the existing related items, or clone this item and all related items. Remember that all the different options I mentioned we can actually do. And in a single click, actually, we can clone this item, all the other related items we can clone, and create all the traceability relation. So in a single shot, you can do all of those. Or you can do the branching also. In that case, you can do the branching and have a branch name like the customer 1, etc. Okay? Now, we actually have a very graphical way of showing that. So for example, here is the branching and cloning, the version diagram. So it is the same requirement 1, then version 1, 2, 3. At the version 3, we had two customers, Atlas and Moses. And they have a little bit of different requirement related to the number 1. And so we created two branches, one for Atlas, one for Moses. And then Moses also has two locations, UK and Australia, which has got a little bit of different requirements. So we branched again to Moses UK and Moses Australia. So Atlas has its now own branch going through version 1, version 2, etc. And Moses has its own branch, version 1, then version 1 branches to Moses UK and Moses Australia. So this is a great way not only creating those branches, creating those clones, but also visualizing the relationship between these different branches. Actually, you can even do the comparison directly from here between the different versions of, so between this version and this version, whatever is the comparison, you can do those kind of things directly from this diagram itself. All right, so that is how we do the version branching and cloning. So let's go back to Kovair presentation once again. The last item is the baseline. So one of the challenges for the release management is to find out what are included in a release and how the changes in the requirements are reflected in various releases, which basically means that as we change the versions of the requirements, which version are included in what release. And thirdly, what are the differences between two releases? There may be certain requirements which is included in one release but not in the other release, or a same requirement is in two releases but there are different versions. Or it may be the same requirement, same versions are in two releases. So we should be able to do some kind of comparison between these two releases. And the baseline is the answer to that. So what is a baseline? Baseline is a snapshot of the requirements and versions. And you can name those baselines by different releases. And once you freeze that baseline, you should not be able to add any more requirements to that baseline. And then you should be able to do the comparison between the baselines also. So these are the challenges, and the baseline is a very nice answer to that. And let's look at how Kovair does that. So for example, if we look at here, these are the two baselines. One is the baseline for beta 1 release and baseline for beta 2 release, right? And these are the different requirements which are already included in beta 1 and beta 2. Now from this comparison, immediately we see that requirement number 1 is in beta 1 but not in beta 2. 3 is in both beta 1, beta 2, and their version number is the same, version 1. On the other hand, the requirement number 5 are both in beta 1 and beta 2, but the version numbers are different. It is the version number 2 which is included in beta 1 and version number 3 included in beta 2. As a matter of fact, I can even see the comparison of those two versions just using that comparison, the same comparison tool we had seen before. Similarly, for 7 and 10, they are exactly the same for beta 1 and beta 2. So using this comparison tool, you can actually create and see what is the difference between two baselines. And you can actually create a report out of that if necessary. So that kind of completes our baseline here too. So let's go back, and now let's open it for a Q&A session. And I'll be very happy to answer any of your questions you may have. Please use that, I think we have a chat box there which you can use to create any of the questions. Actually, I have already got a few questions here. So one of the questions is, let me make it a little bigger. We use more than one type, but selecting the most used one, need to be able to select more than one. Once again, let me read it. We use more than one type, but selecting the mostly used one, need to be able to select more than once. I think I'm not reading it correctly. If you are using multiple different types, I think you should be able to select them. And are you saying that you are you want to create the traceability between the types? Possibly I don't understand the question very well. Okay, the next one is that can we generate requirement-based test cases with this tool? We can create the test cases, yes, automatically from the requirements management using our process, and we also have what we call the policy engine. And basically you can transfer many of the field values from the requirements to the test cases, including the description. But typically what we have seen, our customers needs to do a pass going through the test cases to kind of clean it up and create more of a step-by-step test procedure. So the answer is yes. Does your software comply with the FDA requirements of 21 CFR 11? The answer is yes, we do, including, for example, electronic signature. That is one of the, as you know, possibly that 21 CFR 11 requirement. We are one of the few tools, requirements management tool, where we support electronic signature along with all the other requirements for 21 CFR 11. Can you talk about your support for integration with other tools, for example, Subversion, Bugzilla, Track, also client support, Dev Studio, Eclipse, etc.? Good question. Kovair has industry's leading ESB, that is Enterprise Service Bus integration technology called Omnibus. And using that, we have created a wide number of integration adapters for the third-party tools, as well as you can create it for your in-house tools as well. So we already have adapter for Subversion. We are actually creating with a number of other tools as well, including, for example, we have ClearCase Perforce integration. We have Development Studio, Microsoft, what is called Team Foundation Server, TFS. We are working on the Eclipse right now. So yes, please talk to our sales guys. They will give you a whole list of all the adapters we have. Next question, can you link requirements to user training or procedure? Yes, we can. For example, in Kovair, Kovair is also a platform, so you can use that platform to create your own entities. So what we have talked about today is all the ALM related kind of entities, the requirements, the test cases, issues, risks, etc. But you can create your own entity, for example, called the training, for example, the procedures, and create the traceability relations between the requirements and training in whatever way you want. Can we also do risk analysis? Yes. Kovair has a very powerful way of doing risk analysis, risk management. So the typical way you do it is that risk is an entity within Kovair, another application you can think it. And you can identify a set of risks when you are starting a new project, and these risks will be related to different kinds of requirements, and you can create traceability relations between them. Then, as you are tracking the risk, as you know, the risk changes its kind of profile, the probability of happening, and also, for example, it can have the impact or how critical it is, and what is the impact of that risk to the rest of the system, etc. So those change over time. And at some point of time, some of the risks may actually happen. In that case, you create an issue out of that. And also these risks are related to the requirements, so you immediately know that because of the risks, what are the requirements are affected by that. So yes, we have a very powerful risk analysis, and if you want to see a demo for that, we'll be very happy to show that too. What about linking requirements to security roles so that changes to security can propagate functional tests? Okay, let me understand once again. What about linking requirements to security roles so that changes to security can propagate functional tests? Okay, sure. So you can have the requirements, some of the requirements you can categorize as a security requirements or security roles or whatever type you want, and then you can have a traceability relation between those with the other test requirements and other things, so that if those change, what we have shown in impact analysis, you can actually flag all the related items. Okay, so that was some of the questions. Okay, this is a new question. Can we sign off on requirements for a given release cycle? So sign off means that basically when you are, this is actually goes into the baselining, that as we have seen that we can capture the requirements related to a particular baseline, and then you can freeze that baseline so that you know that those requirements are now frozen. You should not be able to change or add anything else to that particular release. The next question is, do you have any limit on number of levels of Kovair can handle between various requirements of traceability? As far as I know, there is no such limit. So you can create as many different types and create the traceability link between the different levels. The only, I think, the limitation is more from your usage point of view. For example, when you are looking at a hierarchy, if it is a too much deep hierarchy, more than 3 or 4, then it becomes a little difficult to manage that. That is the only limitation from the usage point of view. But from the tool point of view, I don't think there is any limitation. Next question about the pricing, and I think the best way to handle that is why don't you, our actually salespeople can get in touch with you, and or you can give a call to our sales guys, and they will be very happy to give you the different kind of pricing options for Kovair, because Kovair has many different configurations. So the pricing question is not very simple to answer in one single sentence, basically. Okay, so the next question is about the process. So do we have any kind of workflow engine? And thank you for asking. Yes, we have a very powerful way of actually looking at the process, and you can create a process using our visual drag and drop interface, visual designer, very much like Visio. So you can create that process and implement and enforce that process for all the review and approval of requirements. And this is very powerful because you can include the participants independent of their location. They may be anywhere in the world, still they can participate in that process, and you can ensure that every requirement is approved and reviewed in exactly the same way, very, very consistently. Okay, so that was the workflow. We have got time for just one more question. So the next question was also about the workflow, and it says that which communication channels are used for workflow communication. There are two ways. One is within the workflow we have a very powerful task management. So a task is created for individual people who needs to do something as a part of the workflow. Also it sends notification email. So either way they are notified that they need to do something about this. Sorry, I think we are almost done here in terms of the questions also. So I conclude this webinar, and thank you very much for joining and participating. Hope this webinar helped you to understand a little bit more about the traceability, the versioning, the baselining, the reuse of requirements, and also hopefully I've shown you some of the power of our tool, how Kovair does many of these things in a very, very powerful way. And thank you, and over to you, Dev.
Thank you, Sky, and thank you everyone for registering and attending our webinar. I'm sure with all the features of requirements that Sky went over, you're now more than capable of delivering high quality code, and I want to ask that you stay tuned to our website, as we do have more webinar series coming down the road here before the end of the year. Certainly feel free to email us at sales@kovair.com or give us a call if you have any other questions that we didn't have time to get to. That's it for now, and thanks again. Done?